I grew up in a tiny town way back in the hills of an Appalachian county. The kind of place where the roads twist around like they're trying to lose you. The trees crowd right up to the edges of everything, and the nights always feel a little too thick, like they're pressing down on your shoulders. My mom only ever had one real rule for me. Just one, and she said it the same way every time. If you hear whistling at night, stay inside. She never gave me a reason that made any sense. If I pushed her on it, she'd just look at me with that steady face and say it again, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Like telling a kid not to touch the stove because it burns. Everybody just knows. I believed her back then. Kids don't argue when their mom sounds that serious. So I stayed inside whenever I heard anything that sounded even close to a whistle after dark. Over the years, I mostly forgot about it. Life moved on. After high school, I left for another state and built a completely different kind of life. The old house stayed exactly where it was, right at the edge of the woods, with the same gravel driveway and the same porch light that always flickered when the wind picked up. My mom never left. She passed away a couple years ago. The house became mine, but I waited almost a full year before I could bring myself to go back and deal with it all. Sorting through her things, deciding what to keep, what to give away, what to sell. That kind of heavy work. The first night I stayed there, the place felt smaller than I remembered. Not the rooms themselves, but the whole feeling of it, like the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something. I left most of the lights on, told myself it was only because I wasn't used to the quiet anymore. I fixed a simple supper, sat at the old kitchen table, and tried to keep my mind on ordinary things. That's when I noticed how loud the woods were. Crickets, leaves rustling, branches moving in the breeze, all of it mixed together into this constant background hum I had forgotten about. Then, right around midnight, it just stopped. Everything went dead quiet all at once. No slow fade, just gone. I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth, wondering what could make the whole forest shut up like that. That was when I heard the whistle. Soft, almost lazy, like someone whistling to themselves while they walked along. It came from somewhere past the tree line, out in the dark. For a second, I tried to make it normal. Maybe a neighbor cutting through the woods on the way home. People do that sometimes out here. But then my mom's old rule floated up in my head, clear as day. If you hear whistling at night, stay inside. I actually chuckled a little. It sounded so silly now. I was a grown man, sitting in my own kitchen, getting nervous over something my mom told me when I was little. Still, I got up and locked the back door anyway, just to be safe. The whistle came again a few minutes later. Same soft notes, spaced out like the person wasn't in any hurry. I walked into the living room and turned off one of the lamps so I could see outside better. The woods behind the house looked like a solid black wall. No shapes moving, no lights, nothing I could pick out. But the sound felt closer now. Not a lot, just enough that my stomach noticed. I stood there telling myself it was probably someone walking across the property. That made sense. Except the way it moved didn't feel like walking. It kind of drifted. One moment the sound was off to the left side of the yard. Then after a short pause, it was more toward the center. Not steady footsteps getting nearer. More like something slowly circling, getting its bearings. I stayed by the window longer than I should have. The whistling went quiet again. Long enough that my shoulders started to loosen up. I even thought about turning the lights back on and going to bed. Then it started up once more, this time from the right side of the house. Closer. Close enough that I could tell it wasn't coming from deep in the trees anymore. It had reached the edge of the yard. My chest tightened. I turned off the rest of the lights without even thinking. The whole house went dark except for the weak yellow glow from the porch light outside. The whistle came again, right outside the window now. Still soft, but perfectly clear. It didn't sound like someone trying to get my attention. It sounded like someone who already knew exactly where I was standing. I took a step back from the glass. That was when the whistling stopped completely. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound had. I stood there, barely breathing, staring at the dark window, even though all I could really see was my own faint reflection. Then came a single, quiet tap, right on the glass in front of me. Not a hard knock, not fast or loud, just one gentle tap, like a fingernail lightly touching the pane. Every part of me wanted to lean in and look, to press my face closer and see what was out there, but something stronger held me back. My mom's voice rang in my head again, calm and serious. If you hear whistling at night, stay inside. She never said anything about not looking. Still, deep down, I knew looking was part of the rule too. So I didn't move. I didn't step closer. I didn't pull the curtain aside. I just stood there. The tapping never came again, and I never heard it leave. No footsteps on the gravel, no leaves crunching, no sound at all. It was just gone, leaving behind that thick, empty quiet that made the house feel even smaller. I don't know how long I stayed frozen in the living room before I finally backed away and went to my old bedroom. I locked the door behind me, though it didn't feel like it would help much. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the floorboards or shift of the old house made my heart jump. I lay there listening for anything that didn't belong. At some point, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, pale morning light was coming through the window. Birds were singing. The wind moved through the trees like normal. Everything felt ordinary again. For a little while, I almost talked myself into believing I had imagined the whole thing. Almost. Then I stepped outside. The ground around the house is mostly dirt, with a few thin patches of grass, soft enough to hold marks if anything walks across it. I saw the prints right away, bare feet from the look of them, too narrow and too long, pressed deep into the soil like whatever made them weighed more than a normal person should. They started at the tree line and came straight up to the house, right beneath the living room window where I had been standing the night before. I followed them around the side of the house, my stomach turning the whole time. The prints wrapped all the way around the building. Slow, careful steps that stayed close to the walls. They circled the entire house, more than once. I walked the full loop twice, just to be sure. The tracks never headed back toward the woods. They didn't cross the yard or wander off. They just kept going around and around the house, over and over, like something had been patiently walking the perimeter all night. I stood there in the morning light, looking at those bare, narrow prints pressed deep into the dirt, and I felt the old rule settle back into my bones. If you hear whistling at night, stay inside. I think I finally understand why my mom never explained it any further. Some things out here don't need explaining. You just listen, and you stay inside. My buddy lives way back in a small Appalachian county where the woods start right at the edge of his yard and just keep going forever. His house sits on a little slope, and behind it, the ground drops down into this thick stretch of forest that looks like a solid black wall once the sun goes down. No streetlights out there, no close neighbors, nothing but trees and whatever else is living in them. We were sitting outside one evening with a couple of old folding chairs and a small fire going in his beat-up metal pit. Just enough light to see each other and the ground around our feet. Everything past that faded into darkness. It was nothing fancy, just a quiet night hanging out. After a while, I noticed him glancing toward the woods every so often. Not in a nervous way, just quick looks, like he was checking something out of habit. I asked what he kept looking at, and he shrugged and told me not to stare into the woods for too long. He said it real casual, but there was something in his voice that made me pay attention. I thought he was joking at first. He's always had that dry sense of humor, where he says things with a straight face to see if you'll take the bait. So I laughed it off and asked what he meant by that. He poked at the fire with a stick for a second and told me he was serious. You can look, but it's better if you don't let your eyes stay there too long. That should have been enough for me to let it go. Instead, it made me curious. The woods didn't look any different from any other forest I'd seen, just trees and branches and layers of shadow. I turned in my chair and stared out there anyway. At first, there was nothing unusual. The firelight only reached the first row of trunks, and beyond that, everything blended together. If you tried to focus on one spot, your eyes would get funny, sharpening and then blurring, like your brain couldn't decide what it was seeing. I figured that was probably what he meant, that staring too long just makes your mind start playing tricks in the dark. But I kept looking anyway. After a minute or two, I started noticing darker patches inside all that blackness, shapes that blocked out even the tiny bit of light that made it back there. I told myself it was just thicker groups of trees or rocks or uneven ground, nothing to worry about. Then, one of those shapes moved. It was a small shift, like someone quietly changing their stance. I leaned forward a little, trying to get a better look. That's when my friend said my name, a bit sharper this time. I didn't answer. I couldn't pull my eyes away. The more I focused, the more that one shape stood out from the rest. It wasn't blending into the trees like the others. It had a kind of outline, not sharp, but enough that my eyes kept coming back to it. It felt like spotting someone in a crowd who doesn't quite belong, even though you can't say exactly why. I tried to convince myself it was probably a deer. That would make sense out here. But it didn't move like any animal I'd ever seen. It stayed perfectly still for a long time, long enough that I almost talked myself into believing I had imagined the first movement. Then it shifted again, and this time, my stomach dropped. It wasn't turning its whole body, just the top part, like a head slowly turning on its shoulders. I couldn't see a face or eyes or anything clear, but there was a difference in the shape. The upper section moved separate from the lower part. That's when I noticed how quiet everything had become. No insects, no wind in the leaves, nothing. Even the fire had settled down to almost nothing, just soft little crackles now and then. The whole yard felt like it was holding its breath. I should have looked away right then, but I leaned in closer instead, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The shape moved again, and this time, it felt closer, even though I hadn't seen it take any steps. The distance between us had changed somehow. My friend stood up beside me. I could feel how tense he was, but he didn't grab my arm or pull me back. He just stood there and told me to stop. I didn't, because by then, I was sure of one thing. Whatever it was looking straight at me. Not in some general direction, directly at me, like it had known exactly where I was sitting the whole time and had been waiting for me to notice it. It wasn't trying to hide. That was what really got me. If it had been an animal, it would have run off. If it had been a person, they would have moved or made some kind of sound. But this thing just stood there, completely still, watching. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt stretched out, like time had slowed down around that one spot in the woods. Then, my friend stepped right in front of me, blocking my view. That snapped me out of it. I realized how far forward I had been leaning, how tight my shoulders felt, and how dry my eyes were, like I hadn't blinked in a long time. He told me we should go inside. I didn't argue. I stood up quickly, kept my eyes on the ground, and walked straight into the house without looking back once. Inside, with the lights on and the walls around us, things started to feel normal again. My chest loosened up, and I told myself it had just been shadows and my imagination getting carried away in the dark. My friend came in a minute later and locked the door behind him. We didn't talk about it. We just sat there for a while, like ignoring it would make the whole thing disappear. Later, I went to the spare room to try to sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, convincing myself I had overreacted, but there was this feeling I couldn't shake. Not exactly fear, more like I had done something I wasn't supposed to do, like I had crossed a line I didn't know existed. At some point, I turned my head toward the window without thinking. The curtains were pulled tight, but I could still see the faint outline of the tree line through the fabric, just enough to remind me how close those woods came to the house. I forced myself to look away right away. I barely slept that night. Every small sound made me tense up. Even now, weeks later, the worst part isn't what I think I saw out there. It's the way it didn't move at all. The way it just stood there, like it didn't need to come any closer, like it already had what it wanted. Because even after I went inside and locked the doors, I still felt watched, like it didn't need the woods anymore, like it had followed me in somehow and was just waiting for me to look again. I haven't been back to his place since, and whenever I drive through any wooded areas at night now, I keep my eyes straight on the road. I don't look into the trees, not even for a second. It was late afternoon when we first heard the voice calling for help, deep in the Appalachian woods. Not the kind of place with nice marked trails or ranger stations every couple miles. This was one of those forgotten stretches in a county most people drive past without thinking twice about. Locals know the old paths, but they don't really talk about them. Just narrow tracks that twist through the hills and fade out if you're not careful. There were 3 of us, me, my cousin Eli, and our friend Marin. We had been hiking for a couple of hours already, following a faint trail that looked used enough to trust. No cell signal out there. No other hikers, just thick trees and the kind of quiet that makes your ears feel stuffed up. We had stopped to take a drink of water when it started. Help. It sounded faint at first, like someone far off who might be lost or hurt. We all froze and looked at each other. Eli stood up, straighter, and listened harder. A few seconds later, it came again. Help. Marin thought it was coming from downhill through the thicker brush. I thought it sounded more off to the left, but the hills made the sound bounce around in weird ways, so it was hard to be sure. We started heading toward it anyway. It felt like the decent thing to do. If someone was really in trouble, you don't just ignore it. We kept moving in that direction, hoping we would spot them soon. But the voice never answered anything we tried to call back. It just kept repeating the same single word, over and over. Help. After a few minutes, something started feeling wrong. It wasn't the word. It was the way it came out. There was no strain in it, no pain, no hurry at all. Just the same flat, empty tone every single time, spaced out like it was on some kind of timer. Help. We paused and listened again. Eli tilted his head and told us to pay closer attention. That was when it really hit us. The voice had no feeling in it whatsoever. It sounded wrong, like someone reading a line they had practiced too many times. The woods seemed to press in a little tighter around us, like the trees had shifted closer while we weren't looking. The voice called out again, a bit louder this time. Help! Still completely flat. Marin tried to make sense of it. Maybe the person was in shock from being hurt. That can happen, she said, sounding like she was mostly trying to convince herself. We kept going anyway. The ground turned rougher, covered in tangled roots and loose rocks that slowed us down. The whole time, the voice kept calling, never changing. That was when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. It wasn't getting louder the way it should if we were actually getting closer. Instead, it would fade for a while, then suddenly sound much nearer, then drift away again. Not like a person walking naturally through the brush, more like it was jumping from place to place. I kept quiet at first. I didn't want to sound like I was overthinking things. But then Eli stopped short. He turned his head slowly, trying to lock on to where the sound was coming from. It just moved, he realized. We all heard it then. The voice had shifted behind us, maybe 20 or 30 feet back down the trail. We spun around fast. There was nothing there, just the empty path and the same trees we had already passed. The woods felt different now, too still, like everything was holding its breath and watching. Then it called again. Help! Closer this time, much too close. It didn't echo like before. It sounded like it was just on the other side of the nearest trees, maybe 10 feet away. Eli took a step back without thinking. That was the moment it clicked, for all of us. We weren't going to find the person calling for help. It was coming after us. Marin suggested we turn around and head back the way we came. None of us argued. We started walking fast, almost at a jog, but not quite running. The trail didn't look the same anymore. Every bend looked identical, every patch of woods blending together, and the voice followed. Help! Sometimes right behind us, sometimes off to one side, sometimes suddenly ahead, like it was waiting. There were never any footsteps, no branches cracking or leaves rustling, just the voice, appearing wherever it wanted, always in that same empty tone. At one point, it came from right beside me, So close I flinched hard. It sounded like it was inches from my ear, like if I turned my head, I would see something standing there. But when I looked, there was only empty air and trees. We stopped trying to call back. We just kept pushing forward, eyes on the ground, trying to retrace our steps to the wider dirt road where we had started. Every minute dragged on longer than it should have. My legs started feeling heavy, like the ground was tugging at my boots. Then, as quick as it had begun, the voice started to fade. It grew quieter, more distant, like whatever it was had lost interest and was falling behind, until we couldn't hear it anymore. We didn't slow down until we reached the wider path and could see the break in the trees where the car was parked. Only then did we let ourselves breathe a little easier. None of us talked much. We climbed into the car and sat there for a minute, hearts still racing, staring straight ahead. Marin finally said we were never going back to that spot. We all nodded without saying a word. We drove out of the county before the sun went all the way down. I thought that was the end of it, just one of those strange things that happens in the deep woods that you try to forget about later. But right before we left the last stretch of trees, right when the forest started thinning out and the road opened up, I heard it one last time. Not loud, not yelling, just clear enough to make my blood run cold. Help. Followed by my name. Same flat, empty voice. Then silence. I keep telling myself it was some trick of the wind or an echo playing games, but I know better. Every quiet moment now, I catch myself listening, waiting. I haven't slept well since. Has anyone else run into something like this in the Appalachian backwoods? Something that sounded human but wasn't quite right? I'd really like to know I'm not the only one carrying this around.